We are here with Sachiko Ide, Professor Emerita of Japan Women's University. And my name is William Hanks from University of California, Berkeley. And Sachiko and I are here to have a conversation about our respective intellectual projects and the research that we've done, and particularly our long collaboration with one another. Sachiko, when I was thinking about this conversation we'd have, it occurred to me it's been 20 years.
Yes, yes, we have been working together in the last 20 years. That's a long time.
Yeah,
Time
really.
flies.
It's it certainly does. Um, I thought possibly we could start by talking about some of your early experiences. I remember from previous conversations that at one point when you were very young, you were out of Japan, and then you came back to Japan and you had some experiences then. And I wonder if you could start by reflecting a little bit on those experiences that you had.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I was born 1939, uh, just before the World War II started. Japan started war 1941, so 2 years after I was born. I was born in Taiwan, that was a colony, sad to say, of Japan at that time. Since war started, the family was never able to come back to the homeland Japan until I am 6.5 after the war. So when I came back to, I should talk to you.
Sure. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
came back to Japan. I think during the 6.5 years, isolated from the homeland Japan, uh, I had the syntax of speaking Japanese,
Yeah.
but after I came back, I didn't know how to say and what not to say in Japanese conversation.
Yeah.
And that was affected me to the extent I was psychologically very weak and afraid of going outside and talk to strangers because the language was insufficient. And that I realized that uh, Japanese grammar was okay, but not having pragmatics uh, doesn't work to the extent one cannot exist. So the importance of how to use language in a proper context is an original question of myself to live.
So that then from there, uh, I went to Georgetown as a French major,
Yeah.
thinking I was going to have a career in diplomacy,
Yeah.
and I was had a I had a major in French and European history,
Mm-hmm.
interwar period, World War II in
Oh,
particular,
okay. Yeah.
um, and studied in Strasbourg for
Mm-hmm.
a year.
Mm-hmm.
Took the following year off from Georgetown to stay in France.
Mm-hmm.
Then, halfway through that year, returned to Boston, where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And in Boston, I actually became involved with the French consulate
Mm-hmm.
because I was interested in diplomacy also,
Mm-hmm.
but with a backdoor way because I became the bartender for the
Yeah.
French consulate.
That,
And the
that's a
English,
pleasant job.
it was a great job,
Yeah.
right? And the English tutor
Yeah.
to the consul general,
Yeah.
and I worked on translation
Yes.
with the scientific attaché, French English.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I worked also for Berlitz a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. And by then I was quite fluent in French.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, English is my native language.
Mm-hmm.
I found translation so difficult,
Yeah.
so hard.
Between English and French, to us, it's so easy to translate.
Right.
Yeah.
But it isn't, right?
Yeah.
And I felt I needed the linguistics. And
Yeah.
then I went to University of Chicago for
Mm-hmm.
grad school.
Mm-hmm.
I was admitted with no financial aid because I
Mm-hmm.
was not a great student, actually. Um, but it was a magic time at Chicago.
Yeah.
Jim McCauley was in linguistics. Jerry Sadock was doing pragmatics in the anthropology department. Michael Silverstein was brand new and very young, 31
Mm-hmm.
when I first met him,
Oh.
only 31. Paul Friedrich,
Paul Friedrich. Yeah.
Norman McQuallen,
Yeah.
uh, John and Jean Komaroff
Mm-hmm.
joined the department when I was a third year student.
Mm-hmm.
And my committee became Michael Silverstein, Paul, not Paul, but Michael, Jerry Sadock, Norman McQuallen,
Mm-hmm.
and the Komaroffs. And that was just a remarkable set of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And it just changed my whole way of thinking. Do you want to say anything about your graduate work or anything?
Oh, well, uh, in those days I was a young student. Uh, the women role is quite different, and that's one thing. And in the years I was college student, uh, status of Japan economically, politically, and for anything, because we are striving from the after the war barren land, and so we are not. I am not in the position of pursuing my career. Most women get married and become a homemaker, and as I said, it was Japan was so poor. We were not allowed to uh, take the dollar into other countries. When I first went to the United States, accompanied by my husband, the funded by the university who offered the postdoc money, fellowship, and getting the Fulbright scholarship for traveling, and the maximum amount of both of us to carry outside of Japan was $200 for a year. So that was that was 1963. After 94, Japan has gaining power, and so it's changing. But was a time we cannot think of going abroad for study because we are not allowed to, unless you are invited, you cannot go abroad to study. And the women's status is after college, you're supposed to get married to a man and serve as a housemaker. So my case was very, shall I say, always wanted to study in the United States and get a PhD, but that was not possible. Yeah, but somehow I find a way of the way to do what I really wanted to do in the current, that's what I am in current status. But I studied at Japan Women's University in the English department. And in the English, working in the English department means all the textbooks, what we all have to learn is about the Western way of thinking. Yes, we did not learn how to express our thought. We all have to learn, all we have to do is to copy the Western way of thinking and writing and things like that.
That's what you were taught.
That was what we were taught. So
Wow.
when I became a staff of the English department at the age of 33, I thought this is not the thing I should teach to the student. I thought students should learn how to express themselves, their own thought. So there was no textbook at all because that was a time when writing something in English is just to translate the English into Japanese or Japanese into English, and that's all. But I thought it would be crucial for the students since I wanted to speak out in the international stage, that what I think I didn't know how to do. So by learning myself and teaching to the students, I learned myself that how to speak to the world. That's not just copying the English language way of saying. So
Yeah.
I started to learn how to speak, how to organize a thought and make an outline and make a thesis to say and express and build up to speak to the international world. So this is revolution in myself as well as for the students.
I'm having the experience as I did with the young Sachiko
Mm-hmm.
who arrives for the first time in Japan and doesn't have a sense of knows the language but doesn't know what to say.
Yes, yes,
Right. And here,
yeah,
so that's already international,
yes,
because you
yes,
came from
yes,
Taiwan,
right,
right?
yeah,
And here you are studying English and being taught what you should say is what the kind of things they say,
yes, yeah,
which makes it a problem again.
yeah,
And when you were just speaking, I was flashing in my mind on, you know, emancipation, emancipation, emancipation. You need not to be told to imitate other people.
yes, yes,
And you're teaching,
yeah,
you're being taught to imitate other people, and you turn around and you teach your students, don't imitate anybody.
yeah,
Find your own voice and
yes,
be
yes,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. And that leads naturally to the next little thing I was thinking that would be fun to talk together about,
mm-hmm.
which is the way just the teaching in general. And I think both you and I have experienced in our respective curricula just the richness of teaching and how much one learns
Yes,
from it.
yes.
Yeah.
I often think of myself who was my teacher,
Yeah.
and I have great teachers that were my students.
Yes.
You know, Typical example is that when we learn about feminism and women and language, gender and language,
Yeah.
I learned some new ideology of feminism and how the language should be uh, in the revolution of the women's status. And I brought that idea and taught my students in classes. None of the classes of language and gender succeeded because students rejected my idea, imported idea from the West.
Ah,
I didn't know why students didn't like it. And the second year, there were no students coming. I had an opening. And so I learned a lot from that.
yeah.
Student doesn't think, uh, you know, brought in idea, imported idea does not fit to them. And so they reject silently. It's sad, but it's true. So I begin to think that uh, learning about the Western way of thinking, theories, and all the established, uh, authorized idea, standard idea, and teach student does not work. Students reject what they don't think right. So I learned a lot from my student and let the student to do what you want to say what you want to say, not to just copying what you learned. And so a number of students became a good scholars, and I learned from them. And and I that's my student changed me too into thinking. And so since what I learned from the West doesn't work with my students, not all of them, but some of them are not still, you know, they don't think useful because it doesn't just, agree with their own idea about what they think. That is the beginning of my thinking that there should be something to represent our idea, some theory that will represent our idea. That leads to the, our contemporary, present status of creating the birth theory together.
Yeah.
So it took years and years,
Sure.
maybe 2 decades or so of
Mhm.
my career to search something not uh, independent of Western of thinking and agreeable to Japanese culture.
Yeah.
So my whole career was uh, in search of what is true to our current, what we are, true to what we are.
Yeah. To me,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like you've really shaped almost like a generation of of really really fine independent
Mm-hmm.
thinking,
Mm-hmm.
internationally oriented
Yeah.
female
Yeah.
scholars, which must be an important intervention just in terms of gender as well as intellectually, but
Yeah.
the very fact of gender.
Yeah.
I imagine when you came into the field, well, you were at Japan Women's,
Yeah.
so you were in an environment designed for that.
Yeah.
But looking further out into the field of sociolinguistics,
Yeah.
I imagine there weren't a lot of female scholars highly placed. I don't know. I don't know what the field looked like in those days, gender wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know,
Yeah.
but certainly I have dozens of students who are flourishing in contemporary scholastic world,
Yeah.
and I have learned from them. I'm so proud of them, but because they don't do what I want to them to do, but they have their own way of flourishing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great. I think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we do not surrender to the authoritarian idea of great scholars,
Mm-hmm.
but we have our own way of thinking that should be treasured and have to be spoken to the uh, world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I taught them how to, present in the world, not the Japanese way, in the Western way of, uh, you know, I gave them tool to out speak up to the world, but the content is individually different. That's why are so they are so wonderful to keep flourishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And keep teaching you.
What?
And keep teaching you, I
Yes,
imagine.
yes, that's
Yeah.
right. That's
Because
right.
they
So
were not
yeah,
replicating.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
it's a way that make me live
Yeah.
like this what I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the way
Yeah.
I feel too.
I
Yeah.
am 16 year, uh, I retired at the age of 68. That's the compulsory retirement at
Yeah. Yeah.
JW, Japan Women's University. But I am more and more active intellectually after I retired in the last 16 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That wow.
I never, decline.
That's an argument for
Retire.
retirement that I'm
Yeah.
going to remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because
My students keep inspiring me.
yeah, you first when you're new and you've got just did your dissertation and you're brand new
Mhm.
and you think, oh my God, I have to teach these courses. What am I going to teach? And then what am I going to say?
Mhm.
And this was a lecture course. And
Mhm.
Michael,
Mhm.
which anybody that ever worked with Michael Silverstein knows, he was an incendiary lecturer, fantastic lecturer.
Oh,
Oh, really, really. And it was dense and it was argued
mhm.
and he had it all written out,
Mhm.
jokes and everything. It's true.
Even joke.
Even the jokes.
Oh.
But I can remember when I took it with him,
Mhm.
having we were in this huge room and there were people sitting in the windowsills
Mhm.
and on the floor
Mhm.
and every chair was full and it was just dense with humans.
Yeah.
and he's up there lecturing and with a blackboard.
Yeah.
He was very good at the blackboard and he had very good printing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it was a very high bar, right?
Yeah.
So I remember working so hard
Yeah.
to put together the lectures.
Oh, must
You know,
be.
every week you're doing new
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the first run, right?
Yeah.
So you can say immediately,
Yeah.
in respect even of your own work,
Mm-hmm.
when you begin teaching is when you really that's your next PhD.
Mm-hmm.
It's your next training,
Mm-hmm.
and it's after the PhD. It's more advanced because it's harder. You have to figure out. You have to compose the, you know, so so the teaching there, and then in a place like Chicago or Berkeley. In general, in anthropology, well, it would be the similar in linguistics, I think. You look across your students, and you get students who work everywhere from Australia to Greenland to Africa to the Amazon to Southeast Asia to China. You get everything, so it becomes, and you have to learn about what they're doing to advise them, and they write papers for you, and you have to, so you're learning, and it's like world ethnography because you're getting all this from them, you know.
At the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
At Berkeley too?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
It's
see.
part of being in anthropology.
Yeah.
People are all over the place, and in linguistics, you're going to have students doing all kinds of different languages. Um, so then it's very palpable that they are teaching me, and you just learn so much from the students.
But you are capable of handling those topics. That's because your what shall I say, range of interest is so wide open.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I remember clearly when I read Silverstein's 1976 article on shifters.
Yes.
Am I right?
Shifters, verbal categories, and cultural
Yes,
description.
it is 1976 article.
I think it might be 74. I think,
Uh-huh.
or maybe it was actually because it came out in an SAR volume, which used to be the School of American Research, and now it's the School of Advanced Research. Same thing.
And I was out of linguistics,
Yeah.
I thought, reading Silverstone article, I had been in jail and I was freed from the jail. And
Michael would appreciate that.
Yeah. And I, read that article more than a dozen times.
Oh.
With a lot of, even his one phrase freed me, emancipated me.
Yeah.
What I have been in, and it's maybe influence of Michael to you must have been tremendous. In reading his idea of opening the door to everything.
In my very first year, to tell you how generous Michael was, in my very first year as a grad student, in the spring of 1976, Michael gave me a one-on-one tutorial course, 2 hours a week for 8 weeks, one-on-one, on case theory and ergativity. He had just written Hierarchy of Features and Ergativity at the time, and which was there's a very compressed period for Michael when he published a bunch very important stuff. I would say up to 1979, from 1974 to 1979. For me, it's a block. 79 was the language structure and linguistic ideology which was presented in the CLS volume, Chicago Linguistic Society, the year that I was an officer.
Oh, I see.
We got Goffman to give a paper as well.
Oh, I see.
Oh, that was a great meeting. But anyway, yeah. So it was wonderful, and it does remind me. Sometimes it's something that my students know is an opinion I have, but sometimes with really great thinkers, including like Michael,
Mm-hmm.
but not only, many others. Bourdieu, I think, is similar to this. It helps a lot if you start engaging them when they are young and the work is new,
Mm-hmm.
before it grows a lot of vocabulary and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of complexity, and before it grows boundaries. So I remember when in those years with Michael, we were very close.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he wrote an article on deixis and deducibility, which
Mm-hmm.
appeared in the Berkeley Linguistic Society papers.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, he referred to what I, this is a quotation, what I call, quote, metapragmatic, end quote.
Yeah.
So very shortly after that, the
Uh-huh.
quotes will go away.
Yeah.
But it's still early, and so he's still
Yeah.
putting them in scare quotes,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So what I, or you read Saussure. Saussure
Yeah.
did all kinds of
Yeah.
things, but that course is
Yeah.
amazing, right? Bourdieu, The Outline of a Theory of Practice. Bourdieu wrote a huge amount of work, and a lot of it I really like, but the outline
Mm-hmm.
is simply brilliant, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, and I have when reading it, I felt liberated, exactly the way you just said.
Liberated. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I was looking, the thing is, I had been trained in speech act theory. What I had for resources,
Yeah.
very strong training from people like Jerry Sadoff and Jim
Yes.
McCarley and
Yeah.
among others. Um, and Jerry is fabulous on speech acts
Mm-hmm.
and wrote the book on a linguistic theory of speech acts, which we studied. And Jerry became a very important practitioner of Gracian pragmatics,
Mm-hmm.
and I studied it with him, and it was wonderful. But I was just, because I was doing the anthropology at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
I was acutely aware, and this was formative for me, I was acutely aware that linguistics, even with the best ordinary language philosophy you can get,
Yeah.
at the time, certainly Grice and Austin were fabulous. Um, Even there, you really do not have linguistic resources that will make it possible to characterize context in a satisfactory way.
Yeah.
And
That's why we started to question
yeah,
something to
exactly.
clarify that.
In thinking of the kind of life course of a scholar like you,
Mm-hmm.
uh, engagement outside the academy
Mm-hmm.
with real world problems
Mm-hmm.
seems to me in principle very valuable. It's very different from the idea that that's applied and I'm a theorist.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's like, okay, you can be a theorist, but there's a world out there, right? And so the question that raises for me, and which I'd be delighted to hear you reflect on if you are willing, was in the course of those experiences with governmental commissions,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear something about the experience, how you experienced it,
Mm-hmm.
and if you think that it had any impact, and
Mm-hmm.
if so, I guess what sort, on the development of your ideas as a sociolinguist.
Okay, thank you very much for asking this.
Yeah.
Uh, at the turn of the century, meaning from the 20th century or into a 21st century, Japanese government, actually the Minister of Education and Science and Sports, questioned the question so that we form the commission and give answer to the question. The question is, uh, we have to do something about the Japanese language. How should it go in the 21st century?
Mm.
And one of the central problem was uh, Japan is modernized developed countries recognized like that. But in spite of that, we have honorific system, which is supposed to be the language of the, what shall I say, the very traditional society where the kings and hierarchy of the social status are, you know, are, and so that you use honorifics to the people in higher rank and using this honorifics to this level of people, and that kind of system, the use of honorifics are geared to those stratified society. Is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we are supposed to be, Japan is supposed to be a democratic country, but we still keep using honorifics. And so the commission I was chairing was how to use language, especially the honorifics. And people at the commission were total number of 50 people from all sectors, uh, like people, school teacher, or newspaper editorial,
Mm-hmm.
and a singer-songwriter, linguist, language specialist, and everywhere of representatives of all sectors and concerned who are concerned about language were members of the commission. And particularly in my section was language use, especially the use of honorifics was discussed among about 12 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the result of this commission's report is reflected in authorized language textbook in Japan, so that it's very responsible to work for that, because that shows the direction of the teaching of language in Japanese. It will be reflected in that authorized, language textbooks to be used in Japan. And so we questioned if we ever want to abolish honorifics or not. But since we are using honorifics so extensively everywhere, except for a few exceptions, so we cannot say we do not use honorifics in the 21st century. But we had a serious discussion over almost 2 years. We ended up to the conclusion that use of language, including whether you include honorifics or not, depends on the situation. When there is no right or wrong of the use of honorifics, but whether you use it or not depends on the situation where you are in. And the only criteria we proposed was uh, to be appropriate to the situation.
Yeah.
If you read the air correctly and say the words honorifics correctly, you are okay. So, for example, at the very none of the examples we propose, but the first example in borrowing the book, you say 本貸してくれる with the sentence does not include honorifics. This is appropriate among the people who are very close in a casual situation. But at the level of very among the people who are with status difference, they can use uh, honorifics to saying the same thing. Can I borrow your book? This book, you can use with honorifics. So all the rule is all relative to the situation, to be appropriate to the situation. So we ended up to the conclusion that honorifics we use, but you can use it or you don't use it, or depend on the context of speaking. That's the conclusion. By the way, in being trained as a linguist, I thought speech acts theory or Rice's maxim of conversation, which is supposed to be universal principle of language use, might be of some use. At first I presented it as main character of that theme, but I was so much, embarrassed. None of the theories which is supposed to be universal, which I learned in linguistics, do not work in the context of Japanese language use. That's what I learned from this serving the committee and talking about Japanese language from all angles, from all different, members of the committee. What I learned was Japanese language inherently have to be used. Japanese pragmatics have to be very relative, uh, and that whether you use honorifics or not depend on the rule of wakimae. Wakimae is a sense of place or sense of what you are expected for. And if you have this, you know whether you use honorifics and what kind of honorifics or not to use it. And there is no set up rule, but you have to be sensitive to the context. And that's what I learned. So I thought this had to be put into my work papers, and I presented it in writing the paper in English. The word wakimae, uh, closest equivalent word for wakimae is discernment. But discernment does not represent correctly, not the translation of wakimae, because discernment is done by egocentric sense yourself. You discern and use it is not the way we are using. Something wakimai is there is no clearly set rules, but you have to sense it and know where you are, and then exercise your knowledge, linguistic source to fit to the context. That's relative, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because listening to you, I've of course been thinking with Guacamai for years at this point, but it just occurs to me the way you've just explained it that it's very, very close to a shifter. If we were able to strip away the egocentricity of discernment or
Yeah.
discern as a verb,
Yeah.
make it even just give it a we rather than an I. And we said, well, wakimai is a sense of what is called for right here and now.
Yes.
Not across
at this moment.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it has an index. It has an origo.
Yes.
And the origo is right here now, like a deictic.
Yeah.
And it has a value, like a deictic. Its value is to sense what is called for, expectation,
Yes.
As a function of the indexed here now.
Yes.
Right. So it's got an origo, and it's got something. It's not a. It doesn't. Well, it. I wouldn't call wakimai necessarily a referring expression.
What's the expression?
Well, like this and that make reference to individual objects.
Yes.
I would not call wakimai a pointer that way.
No.
But it has the same relativity to the origo of the right here now at which the judgment of discernment is made, or the sense of it. If I understand correctly, wakimai, as you use it, possibly as it is semantically, but at least as you use it, it's more of a pre-reflective sense.
Yes.
It's not that you pull back, look, and think from outside at all.
Yeah.
It's all about being within.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily cognized. It's a sense.
Not cognized. You have to sense it.
development. But I must say that Wakimai was a turning point for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is
That
that,
was the early 20s. You,
yeah,
you, oh,
this one? Oh, no, okay.
look at this book.
Yes.
And I gave this book
Yes.
when I visited Berkeley in
Right.
2002.
Yeah.
And I gave this book. Book was just born,
Yeah.
in which I have a paper which says
Yeah.
about Wakimai.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and 100% of my field work was done in Maya, no Spanish at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's replete with evidence about how people use these demonstrative deictics in Maya,
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of hours of recordings,
Mm-hmm.
and how they think about how they use. Demonstrably aware, pardon the pun, demonstrably aware of all kinds of other factors. So it was very clear to me that I needed a language, an analytic language, in which to talk about an awareness of context
Yeah.
that was much broader and much more holistic
Yeah.
than the analytic parameters that one wants to associate with discrete linguistic forms, whether they're morphemes or bimorphemic or multimorphemic or phrases or whatever. And when through you and your work,
Mm-hmm.
I learned of Wakimai. I would never come up with that, and I don't speak Japanese, right? And it was like, that's what I need.
Yeah.
I need a subsidiary, non-thematized awareness of a holistic context,
Yeah.
which does not have a fixed set of parameters. And when I learned Wakimai, I felt, yes, that's exactly it. And I don't have a word for that in any other language I speak.
So we started to work on the same project.
Yeah.
Yeah, we created the project of emancipatory pragmatics.
Yeah.
Starting in 2005 at River Gardens April conference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
remember well.
we started that, and after that, until this year's Brussels, April conference in Brussels, we had kept on going, creating a panel called Emancipatory Pragmatics with subtitles changing, but we kept going on after 2005, the project of Emancipatory Pragmatics.
Yeah.
That means that questioning the orthodoxy of pragmatic theories, we wanted to be freed from the uh, established theories, but we want to search for something new.
Yeah.
To be to be explained. It's a new formal idea to be explained.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
things we haven't been able to approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our team had been,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, right. So I remember vividly the early years of our group. And I mean, it was wonderful for me because we had in the group a number of Japanese scholars,
mm-hmm.
Korean,
Mm-hmm.
Thai,
Mm-hmm.
Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
Libyan,
Yes.
several people from Northern Europe,
Yes.
myself, I guess one or two other Americans occasionally, but not, yeah. People from Germany
Yes.
came into the group.
Yes.
So we had people from Germany and Denmark, and I don't think we had anybody from Finland, but we had certainly we had, yeah. And that the emancipation was really about what you've already referred to a couple of times today, which is these moments in scholarship when one experiences, and I think hopefully many people have these occasionally, they're worth paying attention to, moments where you experience some, I don't know, an affinity for what your work, the framework you're working with, or that it opens up certain questions which you haven't been able to address,
Yes,
but
yes,
that
yes.
it imparts a sense of freedom.
Yes, yes.
And it's like sometimes it's people say, you know, the truth frees,
Mhm.
will free you, you know. But new ways of thinking free you too.
Yes, yes.
It was grounded in the way we interacted with each other. And it was, for me, a kind of model
Mhm.
of how you take a group of people who are very different
Yes,
and create a space
yes.
in which they can function as a community of debate.
So many of younger generation, for example, Japanese young scholar,
Yeah,
are finding this space so that they can say what they found in their data,
yeah,
honestly speak out.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a great encouragement for younger people
yeah,
who deal with the uh, linguistics discourse data, which does not fit to the Western, is not, enough. The Western theories does not, fit to their data. Found a way to express within this emancipatory pragmatics uh,
yeah,
open space, so that one of the crops out of this our project is publication for Journal Pragmatics, special issue of towards emancipatory pragmatics
yeah,
in 2009, with the introduction why Bill you wrote why we have to do this.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and in 2012 and 14 we have collection of papers in which we collected papers from Thai, for example, with the linguistic data,
yeah,
discourse data,
mm,
where the data can be explained in terms of Buddhism.
yeah,
So for that paper, title had the word Buddhism,
mm,
and it was difficult to let the papers get published, but reviewers refused. Having a religious name in the title is not scientific, so it
mm,
cannot be published. But we did publish
yeah,
so that we can broaden the perspective. Many papers like that in the framework of the emancipatory pragmatics, the special issue,
yeah,
and we walked slowly 2009, 2012, and 2014
yeah,
started to flourish. It used to be the model come from the West, but model can come from the Japanese language, and
sure.
that is one.
Or Thai, or
Yeah,
Chinese,
oh,
or
that's Yoko Fuji's paper.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's in 2012
yeah,
became the foundation of doing the comparing work with other languages.
yeah,
Now come up to 6, 7 languages.
yeah,
Yes, but anyway, those steps led to the theoretical, shall I say, presentation in 2019
yeah,
at, at the special issue called Forwardist Pragmatics.
right,
Yes,
yeah, exactly,
and in that you presented the Bach theory,
yeah,
which is a groundbreaking work, religious background,
yeah,
which is, turning everything, from individual anchored way of looking at
mm,
for bar oriented. The individuals in bar is just a part of the bar,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Which is
yeah.
very difficult to understand.
The progression from Wakimai
Mm-hmm.
to the early work in emancipatory pragmatics,
Mm-hmm.
the early volumes, to Ba theory,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very natural progression.
Yes.
Looking in retrospect, when it was unfolding, it was more
Yes.
difficult. Um, and the guiding concept of all of them for
Yes.
me, my own idea was I want to pluralize the analytic meta language. not only the objects. Why couldn't I analyze it? If I can analyze Japanese through a framework that's developed in English, why can't I reverse the arrow and analyze English through a framework that's developed in Japanese? I mean, if that's the promise. In any event, the experiment is to pluralize the analytic language, the framework. And from a linguistic point of view, that's not at all straightforward. That is not what we do. The way we distinguish theory from religion or science from religion is not the same.
Yeah.
And that boundary is not the same, and it's not as impermeable.
Oh, Bill, could you tell us, tell me how you spent so much time and you thought it worthwhile coming to Japan and learning what it is to do the Zen sitting and
Yeah.
being in the temple and learning about martial art and know and experience and watching know and tremendous amount of reading on Nishida, Japanese philosophy, and all that. What does it mean to you? So all those, several years or more than several years, you have been involved in learning about the spirit of Japanese.
Yeah, more than 10.
Yeah, more than 10.
More than 10 I've been involved in that. So
what
yeah.
This experience you had learning about Japan affect your understanding and creating the bar theory?
Oh, yeah, deeply. I think it began, well, first of all, somewhere along the line, and I don't know when, because this is about you, not me.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, you came into one of our meetings and you introduced bar theory.
Yeah.
And it was brand new. And I don't think
what?
brand new to us. It was
brand new.
all completely new
No.
to us.
Yes.
But everybody in the group, nobody knew it.
I remember that.
Yes. And you brought it
I
in.
invited Shimizu sensei.
Right.
Yeah.
And you invited Shimizu Hiroshi.
Hiroshi?
Yeah. We call Shimizu sensei, who is a biophysicist.
Yes.
And University of Tokyo level emeritus professor of physics. I mean, so we've got a very serious scholar here.
Yeah.
And I remember the day he came.
Yes.
And I remember the feeling it gave me.
Yeah.
You could just tell by looking at him and his manner, the kind of, I don't want to say the kind of thinker he was, but this was a real scholar.
Yeah.
And he came and he gave his analysis in terms of the egg.
Yes.
The idea being that the self is a two-parted structure. There's a core quasi-egocentric self, which is rough like the egg yolk, and then the white around it is non-egocentric, because if you put eggs in a pan, the whites will run together and the yolks will stay separate. Right? And I mean, I must tell you, I was looking at it thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do with these eggs. How can I do it? I mean,
it's a metaphorical,
it is.
It's a model.
Yeah, but I know. Well, I figured out what I could do with it.
Yeah.
But at first, I'm saying, so I was uncertain, but I was very drawn to his presence also and the rigor of his thinking. And when it became clear after I started reading his writing, the parts that are translated, and when it became clear that if you think that it's funny to use the metaphor of an egg to model a person, why don't you think about cell structure and think about the nucleus, I guess, of a cell, and the way and the perimeter or whatever they call it, whereby it merges with or doesn't or connects with other cells. And suddenly this is no longer a far-fetched image. It's an image that's actually very close. and then as I was reading with Shimizu Sensei's writing, another thing happened, which was very important for me, and once again, in a way, liberating. And that was became very clear to me that this Ba theory, the more I started getting into it and reading about it, the more I realized this is a philosophical concept.
Yes.
That was not developed
Yeah.
by the Kyoto School in order to explain language at all.
Yeah.
Language is really not on the horizon, as far as I can tell. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I've done some reading, as you say. And so here he was using a philosophical framework developed by Nishida in a book entitled Inquiry into the Good.
What's that?
Inquiry to the Good, or
Oh,
of
yeah,
the good.
Zen no Kenkyu. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The first book of Nishida.
Exactly.
Yes.
And Nishida is in dialogue with Greek philosophy. He's read some William James on pure
Yes.
experience.
William James. Yes.
Yeah. But it's philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And Shimizu Sensei is a biophysicist doing
Yes.
science.
Yeah.
And he's interested in the generation of information in complex systems. So without making a big deal about it, the lesson I took away was, oh, this is a philosophical framework that can be used in an operationalized way to explain phenomena in the world. Because that's a translation. You know, not all philosophy will allow you to formalize it. You know, it's just can be, but there he was. And so, and that was to me that the light went off in my head, and I thought, you wanted to bring it into language. I liked it instinctively, but I didn't quite understand it yet, and so I started reading.
Oh.
And you did another vital thing for me, which was you handed me a copy of Izutsu, Toward a Philosophy of Zen Buddhism.
Yes.
Which is a singularly brilliant book. I consider that book as good as The Outline of the Theory of Practice, or Saussure.
As good as what?
The Bourdieu's Outline of a Theory of Practice.
Oh.
Yeah, or even Saussure. In other words, it's a major breakthrough book in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so
that's the book you met Izutsu.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had never heard of him. So I'm reading Izutsu, and I'm following every reference I can find, and I figure out because we didn't ever talk about the Kyoto School, and I finally figure out there's this thing called the Kyoto School, and there's this philosopher called Nishida Kitaro, and then the Nishitani and Tanabe and Masuji and so forth, and a world is opening to me that
Wonderful.
I never knew it existed, never. And as I'm reading along in the Izutsu, who is not from the Kyoto School, but is a very close friend of Shisteru Ueda, Ueda Sensei, who died just a couple of years ago, as you know, they were very, very close. Izutsu was very critical of Nishida. So he's not in the school,
in the Kyoto School,
but he's very relevant, and it turns out that he helped me crystallize my way of formulating Basho as a theory that can be used for language.
Oh, that's the story. Yeah.
Yeah. And
what a fascinating idea. I have 2 books by Izutsu here.
There you go. Yeah. We got
one
some
is
markers on them.
Consciousness and Essence.
Yep.
And the other one, Towards the Depth of Meaning. And the subtitle is Philosophy of the Basis of Eastern Philosophy.
Yeah.
By East, he includes Islam, Buddhism, and
Russian
Social,
Orthodox, maybe.
and in Indian philosophy,
Yeah.
yes, he includes everything into the category of East,
Yeah.
except for the West.
Yeah.
And so includes, he's a specialist in Islamic culture.
Yes.
He is the one translated to the, what's that?
Quran.
Quran,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. These two books I can see repeatedly, and I
Yeah.
will never end up reading it because it's a source of thinking new way.
Yeah.
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 And you and I
Yeah.
admire Izutsu
Yeah.
forever.
Yes. Yeah. So exactly. Exactly. So so there I am reading in the Kyoto school.
How did you create the theory with primary bar?
This is where I'm going. Yeah.
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 Yes, please.
Yeah. So well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm reading Izutsu all the time
Mhm.
as I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. I have a wall of stuff on Kyoto. And so I'm just reading this stuff. I have reams of notes, notebooks full of
I
notes.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm trying to make sense of it. And um, Izutsu actually suggests in the book on the one you gave me,
Yes.
Toward a Philosophy of Zen Buddhism, Izutsu talks about a primary level,
Mm-hmm.
which is what he calls non-articulated.
Oh, non-articulated.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
that's where, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, this would be roughly his version of what I think, something close to what I think Nishida intended with the basho of nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Izutsu was very critical of nothingness, and in his book Language and Magic,
Mm-hmm.
there's chapter 6, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some serious critique.
Mm-hmm.
He does a major takedown of Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, and without saying Nishida's name,
Mm-hmm.
he takes a shot at Nishida on the way by,
Uh-huh.
because he basically says, he's talking about how words create objects which are actually hypostacizations of the meanings and the indirect meanings of language. They don't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
So he's talking about unicorns
Yeah.
and magic language.
Yeah.
And he says, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of absolute nothingness
Mm-hmm.
is incoherent, because absolute nothingness, once you say it that way, it becomes something.
Yeah. Yeah.
You came up with the idea. You said, I have another person I know whose name is Otsuka Mayasuki.
Otsuka Sensei.
Yes,
Yeah.
Otsuka Sensei.
Yeah. Masayu.
Yeah, yes. And he is a lawyer, a judge.
Yes.
And he's very interested in Ba theory. And I thought,
Yeah.
wow, how do you use this theory from the bench as a judge, right?
Oh.
And so
He's a philosopher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you introduced us.
Yes.
And for a year, you created the possibility that for me was a major one in my intellectual and personal life.
Yes.
You set up for Otsuka Sensei and myself to be corresponding for a year.
Yes.
With long emails.
Yes.
And you were translating mine into Japanese and his into English.
Yes.
And,
by the help of other people.
Yeah, maybe Benjamin or so.
Yes,
I don't know.
Yes.
Anyway, it was wonderful because we did all this prior work and we hashed through all these issues.
And connecting the Western philosophy with the Japanese philosophy.
Yeah, I kept coming back with Merleau-Ponty,
yes.
George Herbert Mead, my field, language, what we know about language.
He is a great source of knowledge.
He's a wonderful guy.
Not only Japan, but in Europe.
Yeah, he knew all of them. He had read Merleau-Ponty.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we should have more judges like that in America, frankly, especially now. But, but anyway, so Then we
see.
go to Kamkura,
Yes.
and we leave our stuff in the
Compound.
the compound,
Yeah.
and we sweep. Well, you had me sweeping,
Yes.
which was great.
That's we brought you into the sphere of serene air.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we sat for a little bit,
Yeah.
zazen, but I didn't. I did what I could do. Um, there was Zen archery, I remember,
Yes.
on in the space, and then we had an audience with Yokota
Yes.
Hiroshi, and
Yokota Roshi. Yes.
amazing. And finally, I said, "Well, I don't
What
know,
is Ba?
what is Ba?" And he said to me, "Have some tea.
Yes.
Here's some tea."
And we all had the tea.
Yeah.
And he said,
And then he puts the tea down and he said, "Well, I can only say that Ba is us here now."
mm-hmm. And you drank the tea.
Yeah.
And the water is part of yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. The weather affects you, and outside and yourself is all no boundary.
Yes.
We are part of the, Ba.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm back to Izutsu.
Yes.
I'm constantly going back and forth, back into Izutsu.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm into the sections on articulation.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm
articulation is a key word.
Yes.
Right? That he had that tremendous impact on Iranian Islamic world.
Yes. Yeah.
As a scholar in Islam.
Definitely. There are many students of Islam in the Berkeley department,
mm-hmm.
and they all know Izutsu.
Oh, they should.
All of them. What gets you, to go from primary Ba
mm-hmm.
of non-separation,
yes.
codependent origination,
yes.
non-distinction, no subject-object,
yeah.
no reification. No reification.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. To go from there to what we do every day, including you and I right here now. Yes, there is primary Ba is ubiquitously present mm-hmm. as a deep ground,
mm-hmm.
but we live most of our social lives in a world permeated by language, categorization, mm-hmm. reification, mm-hmm. description, mm-hmm. hierarchy, mm-hmm. subject versus object, subject one, subject two, mm-hmm. separation, mm-hmm. etc. How do you get from one to the other? The answer is there is an operator, a logical operator. Mm-hmm. That operator is articulation.
Yes, articulation. Yes.
In his sense, in Izutsu's sense, semantic articulation.
Mm-hmm.
And
semantic,
by articulating, what you do is you convert. The way I think of it, you convert mm-hmm. primary Ba into secondary Ba.
Yes.
By introducing difference, mm-hmm. right? And then we get into the question of, so is articulation always distorting of reality? Mm-hmm. His answer is no. There are kinds of articulation, even in language, mm-hmm. which, yes, they're articulation because there is a semantics into the language, but no, it's not articulate. It's not distorting in the same way. And that language is poetry.
Yeah.
How to generate secondary Bas, which we call contexts, on the foundation mm-hmm. of primary Ba, mm-hmm. and Wakimai mm-hmm. is right in that articulation also.
Yes,
it's
right.
It's exactly. One of the mediators.
Yeah.
Because it's the moment of apprehension of what is called for in a world of speech and mm-hmm. reification and separation.
Mm-hmm.
On the basis of what isn't
mm-hmm.
reified or separated.
Yeah,
right. So now I'm getting really passionate about, because now I can look at my material mm-hmm. and I can go back into, say, demonstratives, mm-hmm. and I can ask, well, if I re-theorized deictic reference with this framework, what would it look like? Well, the origo would be primary Ba.
Yeah.
And the projection the articulation is obviously the moment of linguistic, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right. But if I'm moving with ba,
Mm-hmm.
there, at no point am I going to assume that it's an egocentric fact.
Yeah,
That's gone.
yeah.
And
That's
at no
good.
point am I going to assume that it's only space
Yeah,
because it's holistic,
yeah.
right? And now I can begin to think linguistically about how language in various different registers
Mm-hmm.
can be more or less opaque to
Mm-hmm.
primary ba,
Yes.
more
Yeah.
or less reifying.
Yeah.
And now I'm imagining a scale of reification,
Mm-hmm.
relative non-reification,
Mm-hmm.
relative nothingness. So through articulation,
Mm-hmm.
right, we create contexts. Thank you. What do you think's coming up next? In where do you think we should?
Oh, since bar theory is not only for opening the door for understanding the language practice in Japanese
Yeah.
and as well as in the shamans of practice,
Yeah.
but all the linguistics work, language study works,
Yeah.
dealt with in a discipline of pragmatics are so limited. Once we open field to the perspective of with making the bar theory and open the world of primary bar,
Yeah.
and we are theorizing it from bar theory. The actual language use is happening in secondary bar. What we have been doing is on the level bar theory, level of secondary bar,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The conversational analysis, discourse analysis, and syntax and everything. But what's left unstudied in the by the students of pragmatics is something like the language of magic and
Oh yeah.
the field that you can only start looking at by creating the bar primary bar,
Mm.
and we have a lot to do uh, before we know how do we analyze, uh, taking into account the deep conscious level
Yeah.
of our performance and speaking, which has a tremendous effect on the feeling we have, you know, emotions and feelings which cannot are not be dealt with the cognitive aspect of language study,
Okay.
but our emotions and the magic, mysterious part of the language function,
Yeah.
and all those things can be opened into the stage of study. And so the impact of having primary theory is just opening a door to the new sphere of language use we have never been able to, you know, explain well enough. And use of honorific is one thing, we didn't know how we use it. It's not the strategy or we don't have the rule to be described, but with the idea of wakimae, which is very vague but very crucial in understanding how to be appropriate in the society by using language, should be uh, reconsidered uh, for the years to the subject to for us to work for the years to come.
Yeah. I agree. It's and it seems like um, earlier we were thinking maybe that wakimai might be like articulation, something that mediates between primary and secondary,
Yes.
maybe. And also, though, um, yeah, we might want to think it that way. But also, it's like it is the awareness that is implicit, the recognition of what is needed, cannot be adequately characterized only by what has been articulated in the context. It relies on deeper level of unarticulated.
Yes.
And
yes,
it accesses
yeah.
something much closer to a relative nothingness characteristic of primary Ba,
Yeah.
and a relative non reification. And the expression "things go without saying" is like
Yes.
a,
Right.
a minor trivial recognition of something like that. I think resonance,
What?
when sounds resonate,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
resonance,
Yeah.
attunement,
Yes. Yes.
merger,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and one could then also consider aspects of or varieties of articulation which are relatively transparent to primary Ba. So are weaker forms of articulation, non-distorting, relatively non-distorting. And one could even look at language by asking those questions, which have never been asked.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, and you can't ask them without a notion of primary Ba.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
We have new way of thinking
Yeah.
in order to develop the idea of primary Ba.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Well, shall we conclude our discussion here?
I think it's an excellent place to conclude.
Okay.
I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sachiko. Thank you.